Hello and welcome to the Painters Motivating Painters review video for June. If you're not familiar with the PmP, we're a Facebook group where like-minded miniature painters get together to share constructive feedback and experiences on the hobby. If that's something that interests you, it's free for all to join, and we do our best to welcome and help other painters of all levels. Uh, the theme for this month of June, it was large scale, so we have a selection of busts and 75 mm models that people have submitted, all of them looking great in their own right. So we're going to get straight into it, and our first up, we've got Pavel Rusinski with this kind of ranger lady looking at some non-metallic metal, large portion of skin, and would love any thoughts on it. So, uh, first of all, good job. I know that a half scale or a half bust where she's down to her waist, that's an awful lot more work than one where it's just like a head, neck, and shoulders. And then anything with a female face takes longer again. So you've got a lot of challenges here, and you've done a great job on it. I think I love how the face in particular, it's very good. I love the makeup that you've added in yourself. I love the contrast, the highlights of the cheeks, and then the kind of the colors in the shadows of the cheekbones and under the jaw there. The tears added in, the redness around the eyes. If you look really closely, you can see her mascara is actually run down her face, which is pretty awesome to be honest with you. And then yeah, it's kind of like it's telling a story as well. Like this is, I can imagine this post being painted by someone else and it looking completely different. But I can totally picture the scene where she's there out in the woods and she's hunting someone down, maybe for something that they've done that affected her personally. So great job on all those counts. Moving down along the model, I think the left arm's looking really good. Love the way you picked out the muscle structure. It's got good definition without looking overly cartoony and no kind of muscle islandy things there at all. The fingers could do with a bit more definition. They're not looking quite as cylindrical, like with the shadows around the edges, and that's actually a good place where you could add a lot more hue, kind of similar to like the cheekbones there, getting some red in at the knuckles, and like yeah, in at the back of the hand, that kind of thing. But like I said, this is a big bust with a lot of elements, so it's tricky to get them all in, and hands are always difficult to draw, difficult to paint as well. Um, I think the color palette's really good. I love all the kind of natural nature tones you've used in it, and it's all very coherent with the brown hair and the brown leathers, and then the green bodice and the gold for the accent color. On the non-metallic metal, the her kind of armor plate there, it's looking very good. I like the kind of brushed steel look to it. I think the shadow, it's very word for it. So you kind of got like an asymmetrical, like a highlight and a shadow, and another shadow highlight. Um, and that looks good for that kind of shape. I think you could have a bit of a reflection of the arm in it since it's so close there. I think you've got a little bit of it in terms of the color on that side. It's reflecting a bit of the kind of colors that are in the arm. But because like what I kind of like would expect for it to be an actual like brighter reflection of the arm near to the surface, just because you've shown it to be so shiny. Uh, Whereas you have it kind of fading away into shadow, and then the arm is there. Whereas uh, it would kind of be that's where the reflection is, and then that tone would then get darker and darker until you can't see it. But that's very advanced highlight stuff, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think the best bit of NMM on it for me is her bracelet she has on her arm. I think it's a complex shape, and you've called out kind of the volumes on it. You got a couple of little nice little pop highlights where it's like looks like a reflection of your main light source. So I think that's looking really good. The gold in other areas, it's definitely selling as gold, but I think you could have a bit more of those brightest highlights on them, like up on her headdress up here near the ear. It doesn't quite have the reflectivity that you have on the bracelet, and then on the kind of chest piece as well. And they could have a bit more volume to them if it's a larger piece as well. But like I said, it's all still reading as gold, so that's very good. Um, and then the leathers look great to me. I like the way there's a bit of texture and it's all differentiated. There's like I can tell that they're different kind of leathers. They're not all looking very samey. And you've got those nice little gems that are tucked away in there as well, which are really well picked out, even though they're such a small piece. So altogether, I think you did a really good job kind of telling the story and giving her a character. And I really enjoyed that. The face is very striking and it's all very pretty. And then as you look closer, there's more and more stuff to kind of discover as you go through the bust, which was great. Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Only one thing that I would add to all that, which is very comprehensive, Was just a little bit more highlighting and picking out individual strands in the hair. I don't think you mentioned that, but yeah, everything else has got such a great level of detail applied to it with textures like in the leather, and as you said, like the brushing of the steel, picking out this fletching. You know, you've gone to quite an extent to pick these out that's really, really small. So when we look up at the hair, there's plenty of opportunity there to kind of pick some of that out. It looks like a little bit happened on the crown of the head, which is great, and you've got kind of the halo highlight running around it, but I think that could just be exaggerated a little bit more with higher highlights around the halo. And then where you see the other highlights in the hair, yeah, just picking out some of those individual strands would really, really help to make that pop. But yeah, otherwise it's a pretty stunning piece. Amazing what you did with the face paint and the eyeshadow running down the face as well. Great attention to detail. Another nice detail that I noticed was the nails. A lot of people don't really bother with nails, but you've done a really, really nice job picking those out and integrating it as well with the scheme. So yeah, nice job, pal. I love it. Alex, did you want to add at all?
Yeah, I was gonna say between the two of you, it's a really sort of comprehensive thing there. I think the main thing for me was again the hair. Just like hair is naturally, it's something that's almost as reflective as sort of metals in terms of that sort of really bright, very sudden highlight. So although it doesn't look like it's not hair. It just doesn't look like it is hair, so to speak. It's sort of somewhere falling between the two of it's highlighted well. The colors really nice for it, but it just needs that little bit more pop. And although there is some texturing around, particularly on the leathers, personally, I'd like to see more of that. To an extent, that's personal preference. I like heavily textured pieces. But I just think when you're working at such a large scale as sort of a 110 bust, you need to really pick out pretty much every surface if you can, if it's appropriate, with some form of texturing, just to really sort of sell that larger amount of detail. You've gone into a lot of detail with other areas, so it kind of balances out not having that. But just something to think about, for your second bust, I guess, given this was your first one.
True. My first busts didn't look that good.
Nope. All right, cool. Nice one. Let's move on up. So next we've got Rob Dennison with his first time painting a bust. Just love some general feedback, I guess. Main focus was the skin and texturing, but any other pointers? So cool. So starting with the skin then. I think you got some really nice tones to this guy, man. It looks like you've put him in his kind of cultural ethnicity really nicely. With his skin tones, so that's a really good effort there. It could do with a little bit of smoothing in the shadowed areas. So if we just zoom in and be picky as hell because it's a bust and you have to be, there's just a little bit of roughness underneath. But the hue transition you've got goes on is pretty good. It could probably do with some more reds like around the cheek and the nose. The lips look a little bit too brown as well for me. So just a little bit more sort of pinky purpley redness there. Same with the ears. But the overall lighting effect that you've put on his face, I think, is quite good. You've picked out the T highlight really nicely, and sort of bridge of the nose is much brighter. These little dimples around the cheeks picked out, so that's all really, really good. Just a little bit more hue in the face, particularly. Same for the arm, pretty much as Matt said on the last one. Just a little bit more sort of reds around knuckles. He's not gripping it tight, but there would still be a little bit more sort of reds and pinks around these very, very thin skin where there's no muscle really. So that's all very translucent skin. Texturing on the red I thought was really good. It's very, 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 very finely done. So it doesn't. I mean, the picture is Facebook quality, so it's not really doing it masses of justice. But I'm sure this looks much better in your hand. But it's definitely visible, and it's very, very crisp and very, very, very thin line. So that's really, really nice work. I would say that the red in general, though, does jump to the deepest shadow a little bit too quickly, like in some of these creases and folds on his left elbow here. So a little bit more transition into that deep. It's great that you've gone that far, but it just needs to be a little bit more transition, I think. And it looks like a bit of same things happen down on the hem. And then if we spin it round to this side, based on the lighting angle that you painted from the first picture, where's he gone? So it kind of looks pretty like dead straight head on. So this section of his right arm here, I think, should be a little bit more brightly lit. It's right that it's sort of shadowed because his sort of, shoulders drop back a little bit. But as we're looking at it straight on, I do think this side could be a little bit brighter. Not as bright, but not this dark. So I think that would help. And then I really liked what you did also with the little green dude on his back. He's got really nice contrast in his face. Beautiful little light catches in his eyes. And they appear to be different sides, the light glints. So this is a very, very picky thing. So looking at the samurai's eyes, the glint is like right in front of his eye, which is another thing that gives me the idea that the light's coming dead on. But on this guy, actually, I guess you're right, actually, because looking from this angle, it doesn't look right. But looking from the front angle, you've actually captured it. So if you're looking, this is the viewing angle here from the front. Yeah, that is actually correct. You've got the glint right in the right place there. Sorry, my bad. I was about to say that it's on the wrong side, but if you look at it from the viewing angle, it's actually pretty damn perfect. So yeah, the only other thing I noticed was with the hair, it's nice that you've taken it further past the hairline. That is cool, but I think that would be possible to do that a little bit thinner. I'm not sure if it's sculpted. It might be. I'm not sure. But some of it looks a little bit thick, like in his beard. It's cool that it's got a patchy beard. That's a nice effect that you've given to it. But same with the eyebrows. Just to thin it out a little bit more and make it a little bit more of a smoother transition. So you can see the brush strokes are a little bit heavy on the hairline. So just thinning those out, you can leave that as it is and just go over it with even more thinner scratches. But it gives him an overall feel of having sort of a patchy beard and patchy eyebrows, and a lot of facial hair for men does end up that way. Check me out, for example. So that's nicely captured. So yeah, there you go, Rob. Anyone else got anything to say?
Yeah, I think in general, I think it's really nicely sort of rendered. For me, I'd say that you could possibly go with a little bit more contrast on the white shirt, sort of deepen those shadows a little bit, just because of how deep you've gone with the shadows in the red. It feels like you've gone with quite a sort of not super extreme, but a relatively sort of harsh light that's casting quite deep shadows. So you could just sort of pull that down a little bit more in the white. I know white can be a little bit tricky to make look really contrasty, but still read as white. But just pushing those shadows down a little bit further would sort of help bring that together a little bit more. I think it would make that where the arms don't quite pop out as bright as you might expect them to. It would make that maybe look a little bit more natural, as though it's meant to be that darker color. And the other thing for me that I sort of stood out to me is how it feels like some of the elements are highlighted under a different light source. So particularly the hair is a really, really cold highlight, whereas the face is a relatively neutral highlight, and then sort of the red is quite warmly highlighted, not just in being a warm color, but the actual sort of highlights applied sort of with a warm light. So that could easily be the case of mixed pigment colors, unless you're using single pigments. If you mix the same highlight color into all of them, the same sort of off-white, you're going to get slightly different results. Or it could just be picking different highlight colors off the shelf, but just sort of, again, it's on these larger scales where all of the volumes are a little bit more obvious. Sort of paying attention to things like the lighting, sort of ambience, can really, really help bring a piece together. Just that little bit tighter, but overall, I think again for a first bust, very, very nice. A lot better than my first were, definitely.
Yeah, I think you did a really great decision on this piece was painting the wrap on the handle of the sword to be green, because then it matches with the little turtle dude, and it doesn't feel like obviously the turtle, it makes sense for him to be green. The wrap could have been any color. You could have made it red, you could have made it white, whatever. But it definitely helps kind of with the overall composition of the piece that it is green, and it's like a little quiet little hero down there doing its work. And on the beard and the kind of hairline stuff, if you want to do more subtle like hair around the edges, might be an idea to mix like some of your dark hair color in with the skin tone, and then just do very fine lines there, so that it doesn't look like there's patches of fine hairs that you're seeing through and into the skin tone. So it's just a little a lighter version of the hair color that transitions into the darkness, just to get rid of that hard line. that you have there. But it's looking great.
Yeah, nice one, Rob. Amazing first person. Good job. Alrighty, Alex, you got Joran.
Yeah, so just sort of looking in general, sort of at this piece, sort of you mentioned in your sort of post about maybe wanting to up the contrast a bit. I think you probably do. There's some areas, particularly sort of the skin feels quite flat to me. The volumes are sort of rendered, but they could go that little bit further. Just make things pop out a little bit in those details. Things like the nose in particular, you don't really catch those sort of the sides of the nostrils very sort of highly. It's sort of more a general triangle sort of highlight and things like that, and sort of picking out some of those extra details that you get in busts. Sort of you've got that sort of sculpted sort of tendon down the neck could be popped out a little bit more because it's a raised volume and things like that. And some of the sort of, I don't know what you call them, quilting, I guess, on the hat could be is quite nicely picked out, but again, it could just be that little bit further. Only in terms of, I think, the way that you've done it with the colours, sort of, it almost reads as though it's meant to be some sort of satiny material. And I would expect that sort of material to highlight a little bit higher, have a little bit more reflectivity to it. So you could probably pop that up a little bit more. Just going to go back to what you asked about in your little post. I think sort of overall, I think the color scheme works. You mentioned about just sort of picking colors that you think look cool and don't really sort of think about tying it together. At the end of the day, if you think it looks cool, that's fine. I think as a scheme, it's quite analogous. It's a good harmony. There's, it'd be quite easy to say just go off and look at color theory and figure things out. Apparently, there's some discourse about that at the moment that I shan't get into. I think that what you've got here works well. There's essentially what the color harmony that you've got is you're working in around the purples, and then the skin tone is a bit more yellow, so it has that contrast and it pops out really nicely. I think that if what you're doing is just picking colors that you think look cool, and it's turning out looking as harmonious as this, just keep doing that. That's working for you. In terms of the base, that little skull plinth, if it's something that's struggling, that you were struggling with, personally, I'd say just clip it off. If it comes with that attached, when models come with these tiny little plinths, personally, I don't think it looks great. To me, a bust plinth looks best when it's about the width of the figure's shoulders. That usually reads as quite sort of well balanced. At the moment, it feels like you could poke it and it would fall over. For me, I'd say the easiest solution, if you've got a little tiny plinth like that comes attached to the model that you don't like, or find a bit weird to play with, just clip it off. There's nothing wrong with that. Chuck it in a bits box or whatever. If it's a little skull like this, if it's just a square bit, you can just clip it off. It doesn't really matter too much. But no, I think going back to the model in general, I think it is really nice. Again, it's something that I'd like to see a bit more in these things would be some more textures. Everything's relatively smoothly painted. Besides, I think it's a really nice piece. I really like the sort of shadow side on the face as well. I think you said something about it not being too smooth. It looks fairly smooth. You can always go in and glaze things more heavily with thinner and thinner glazes until it's perfectly smooth. But you don't always need to. I think it sells well as a light coming from that side and shading his sort of turned away side of his face. I think it works really nicely. Just one thing that I would sort of pop out on and pick out as feeling lacking is your metallics. Just in terms of just a little bit of shading, some inks or washes, just to sort of recess shade it and pick it out almost in that non-metallic style. Just it feels less defined than everything else on there. But that's really just sort of a minor thing compared to the rest of the piece, which I think is really nice.
Cool, yeah, I'd agree with you, man. I thought the travel and the contrast you got in the quilting on the blue hat was better than the rest. So if you just carried that on and helped it through with textures, as Alex said, that would be a really strong point. And then the only other thing I had really was just separation of stuff. So if we look at like the rough around his collar, there should be a really dark shadow through there. Where this earring is against the side of the head, that should be really dark. Anywhere a different material touches another material, there should be a really hard black line. Not a thick one, sorry, but it should be very dark. So yeah, like at the rim of this hat as well, you can see some brown in there. So it's just kind of tidiness there around these little like these brooches that are on the purple fabric there. I don't know what that's called. A ruff. So yeah, just picking things out, separating them would really help this pop as well. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I think the plinth thingy for me works fine because I just read it as being a separate thing the model's sitting on. I think the metallics and the rest of the model are suffering a little bit from they're just painted and they're reflecting the light in the room, whereas you have actually put in the shading and the highlights by painting the rest of the model, so they look a little bit out of sorts with the rest of it. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the little skull thing at the bottom. I think that works because you kind of recognize it as being not part of the model and it doesn't have to be in the same kind of environment as everything else. I'd just like to point out he has an actual like King of Spades
Yeah, that's
tucked into
nice.
that hat rim. So good job on that. I
That
don't know
was
how exactly you did that. It was very awkward, and but fair play to you.
yeah, that was free-handed as well, wasn't it? He said so. Yeah, nice one, Joe. All right, next up, Matt.
Serious
Is
stuff. Okay, so Scott Allen, another first bust.
Woo.
Vice appreciated with this goblin-y guy. So I think the color palette in this guy's nice. I like how you got kind of green skin going up to a nice bright yellow. Then you got the blue hair to contrast it. And you got little like reddish pimples as well in there and the pink inside the ears. I think the oxidation on the armor looks really good. You've got that kind of like, there's rivets and then there's stuff that looks like it's dripped down from it. You could have maybe a bit more on the chainmail, but then again, maybe the chainmail links rub together and it just comes off. So that's all looking good. In general, first impressions, a very nice piece. I think in terms of volumetric lights and shadows, you're definitely going the right direction with the way you've got, like, say, the shadows under his cheekbones and like in his neck in here. But just be a little bit careful in terms of certain areas. It looks more like you've shaded the recesses and highlighted the exposed areas. But like if we look at say the back of his neck, he's got this streak of shadow running right down the middle of his neck, and it's like doesn't necessarily follow that there would be a shadow there because there's nothing to cast it. And then like in his ears and little crevice there, like humans would have definitely a shadow in there, but his ears are like floppy bunny ears, so that's pointing upwards, so wouldn't necessarily have a shadow in that exact location. Um, but the way you've actually picked it out in the areas where you've done it, like even having the shadow actually cast under his ear, I think it looks really good. And just pay a little bit more attention to thinking about where the light's coming from and what would cause any shadows that you're doing. I think that you could maybe make the actual color inside the ears. Um, I'll pick it out a little bit. There's kind of lines of texture in there, but they're quite abrupt when we look in closely to it. Compared to the rest of it, the skin's quite smooth. So you could go off with some glazes in there. You could even add some glazes of a slightly different color, like a more solidish red or a purplish color, and that would fade the lines away. And then you could go over it, rinse, repeat indefinitely if you want. And the eyes, I think like it's an interesting choice to go for these yellow eyes, and they're all solid yellow. But I'm not entirely sure whether they've got a white pupil or that's like a white reflection dot. Uh, and for me, they look a little bit like they could just be. They don't look especially like eyes, if that makes sense. I think you could do obviously he's a fantasy creature. You can have any kind of color you want to his eyes, but we do kind of expect to see like concentric circles of like light and dark and light again. Whereas here we've kind of got a fairly brightish yellow color and then just white. If you had like a black circle that was filled up mostly with that white, it would read much more like an eye. Now it looks a bit like he's blind maybe, or there's some kind of bead, or it's just you have a certain conception as humans of what eyes look like. And I think that you've painted it well, but it's just kind of fallen into the uncanny valley a little bit there. Uh, Definitely great work for first bust. I think you've done a really good job kind of up in the painting level and showing us more detail like you'd expect to see in something of this scale. So great work with it.
Alex, are you going to add in there?
Yeah, I was going to say on so there's a lot covered there. I think the biggest standout for me is as you say the sort of the highlighting of it. It does sort of slightly fall into that muscle island syndrome in a few places, particularly down on the chest. A little bit less so on the face, but that little bit there just in terms of things have been highlighted to the most protruding part rather than to the very, very tops of things. Um, but I think that's covered fairly sort of comprehensively there. But the other thing is just in terms of again separation of detail, sort of the big areas like the sort of shoulder guard could both do with maybe a little bit more either edge highlighting or recess shading, just to sort of knock those down, define those sort of separation of volumes a little bit better. Um, and again, I really like the sort of the way you've got the sort of oxidation around the studs on the camera right side sort of shoulder guard. I'd like to see something similar to that on the other one. The material on the sort of camera left is, for me, it's a little bit undefined in that it sort of looks like it's meant to be rusted metal. Um, doesn't have that sort of oxidation that I might expect. It doesn't have some of the other aspects that to me would make it read a little bit more clearly as rust. So at first glance, it's sort of I can tell that I think it's meant to be a rusted metal at closer inspection. But say the first photo, the sort of head-on one where it's a little bit blurry in the background because of your the way the camera's taking the photo, and sort of at first glance, when I was just sort of scrolling through them, I thought maybe it might have meant to be leather. Um, in terms of I think it's not quite defined in terms of maybe those scratch highlights of and that edge highlighting that gives it that really clear metallic sheen to it to really make it clear what it's meant to be. Um, but no, besides that, I like it. I really like sort of how you've gone, for a first bust, it's really moving in those sorts of more detailed directions. Um, but just in terms of color balance and color sort of composition, the blue on the hair feels a little bit out of place to me. It's somewhat balanced by the oxidation, but it's such a big area of quite a bright blue. It's a little bit distracting to the eye. Um, but that's really just that's just a color choice thing. It works. It's not sort of really garish, but it's a little bit unbalanced for me.
Yeah, I agree. As it's the only instance of that color, if that color appeared somewhere else a little bit and you kind of made a triangle out of it, it would be less noticeable. But yeah. Cheers, Scott. Nice one. Right, so moving up, not that far. We've got TJ Haller with Boba Fett. So he's playing with lighting and shadows to make this fantastically sculpted face really stand out. And it is a very fantastically sculpted face, isn't it? This thing's looking awesome, man. Great job. Love what you've done with the texturing on this black neckerchief thing that he's got on. That's really selling. Definitely black. Nice broad highlight to it, and then some texture, but around about 50% of it is neat black. So yeah, that's a tricky thing to do, and you've captured that nicely. Love what you're doing with the metals on this. That sort of weathering and texture is really nice, and picking out some of the edges, not all of it. When it's this big, you don't need to pick out every edge completely solidly, I don't think at all. And the variation in the damage is really good. I know much of it is sculpted, but same said, much of it isn't. So yeah, really, really good work on that. Flicking round to the back of the head, then we can really see this like this sculpted texture to the skin. So I really like the way you've picked out the wounds, in that some of it is really bright pink, like scar tissue. So it would lead the eye to believe that sort of this one is an older scar than like these brighter ones on his face. These are more recent, so that's fantastic work. Not making them all the same. Nice variation there. I'm not hugely up on my lore, but maybe you could add a little bit of kind of a stubbly hair shadow. I don't know how completely hairless this dude is. I don't know whether he was like burned. I'm not really big on my Star Wars. It looks like he's got kind of a burn scar on the back here, so maybe. But yeah, that was kind of an opportunity if he's not supposed to be completely hairless. So with the rest of the face in general, really, really nice use of the lighting, the way you've picked out, as Alex said earlier, that flared nostril. Really cool. Tops of the eyebrows, eyelids, chin, picking out the extreme highlights really, really nicely. It could maybe smooth it a little bit. Some of them you can actually see individual lines that aren't creases in the skin. So you could soften that a little bit just to make it a bit better. The other thing, I thought his eyes, with bags this big, you would expect them to be significantly darker than they currently are. So with sort of grey blues, sea blue, grey, getting really, really dark in towards the, in that corner of the eye there. But it's lovely how you've picked out the redness in the eyes. So that's really, really cool. You can see it particularly on this angle here. So, he looks like he's been through hell, which he probably has. But yeah, just darkening those bags under the eyes, I think would really nail it, man. And then I wasn't sure what's going on with these kind of scratches that are going on here, whether they're scars. They don't look like scars. If that's sculpted, then obviously no more to be said. But I just wasn't sure how that's kind of rendering. Were they supposed to be stitches or scratches? I wasn't really sure what's going on with those. But that might just be me because I don't know the story of this guy. But yeah, fantastic work, man. Really, really like it. It's great stuff. I'll just push a few more hues around in the skin, like I said, and well, it's already in a strong place. But yeah, great work, TJ. Anyone else?
Yeah. So I think it's sort of bouncing off what you're saying about sort of more hues in the skin just there. When it's a delicate balance in terms of like what scales need what. So where with this being like a 1/6 scale model, you say that's starting to edge into the place where extreme contrast is less important and sort of showing the finer details is. So you've got that in sort of your texturing and things, but just in the skin a lot you can put in at this scale so much more color variation. Things like that old sort of traditional art idea of sort of three sort of color zones on the face, the blue, sort of red, and then yellow. You can sort of bring that out a little bit more here. Sort of you've really sort of pushed the detail on the weathering. I think that sort of the chipping on the paint and things on sort of the sort of chest plate and things and the shoulder pads is really, really nice. I really, really like that. But I just like to see that little bit more sort of detail in terms of the color variation and sort of how human skin is basically just color. It's so much going on there in terms of I'm sure there are people far more well informed than me on these things who can explain the whole science why there's so much color in skin, but I can just go as far as saying there is. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Sort of some redness in the cheeks. So a little bit more there. Again, it could just be there's also lore things involved. I don't know too much about any of that either. But I think it's a really nice piece. I really like sort of the shadow, the more shaded side on the camera left sort of side of the face. One thing that stands out to me a little bit in there is the ear being sort of so brightly highlighted in everything else being dark there. I'd expect to see some highlight in that, but maybe not quite as much as there is. But that's really being really nitpicky. I think it's a really, really nice piece, and I think, you should be really, really happy with how it's turned out.
Yeah, the skin looks really good. I think that when you look at it from the kind of half view where you can see the light side and the dark side, there's like 3D models of people in Star Wars that look less realistic than that. So good job. One place you could definitely add more color is the ears. Like, look how red my ear is compared to the rest of my face. And then if you look at his left ear, it's just a solid color, so it looks kind of plasticky. Like you can see prosthetic faces for like films often have that where they have the skin tone the same in through the ears, but there's a lot more blood vessels close to the surface there. So that'd be a good place to add a little bit more. And it's been said before, but it's definitely worth saying again. Like that armor weathering is like it just looks real. Like it looks like that was painted and then the paint was stripped off and that's what you're left with. So super convincing and really great work altogether.
Cool. Moving up then. Matt O'Brien for you, Alex.
Yeah, no, just sort of general feedback saying what you think is sort of best work today. Always nice to have that sort of pride in your work. I don't always feel that way. Um, so looking at it in general, I think that skin tone stands out to me as being really, really interesting. I really, really like how you've sort of given it that sort of not quite alive look. It's not quite undead, but it's that not quite sort of vampiric type flesh. I assume that's what you were going for. I think that's what the model's intended to be. So I think it reads as that really nicely. That sort of essentially subtracting a lot of the reds and going for more purple shadows works really well. I think you could go for a little bit more sort of contrast in sort of the forehead area. It's not overly defined in sort of the general shape of like that shape of the forehead. It might just be a photo thing. It might even be my screen thing. Where you sort of define the eyebrow ridges there, but not too much of the rest of the face. Um, I think the hair's quite nice. I think that's pretty well rendered. I think grey hair is, or more than just grey, but it looks like you've gone for more of a sort of grey silver hair. Um, and I think that's quite hard to paint. It comes across really well. I think you've got the reflectivity quite nicely. It could be a little bit brighter in that sort of crown, but no, I think it reads as hair and it reads as reflective in the way that I think you're intending it. What feels a little bit weaker for me is the red metallics, in that like it doesn't quite read as metallic in from all angles. I assume you're going for like a red NMM type look there. And I think the from the sort of wider picture view, it definitely reads that. You've got the sort of glints in the right places and things. What I think it is for me is those sort of on the camera left sort of panel, you've got those two sort of streaks of light that don't seem. For me, I can't see the motivation for that in terms of the lighting scheme you're going with. Um, so it just comes across a little bit um, confusing to my eye. I can see what it's meant to be, and I can see what you're going for, and I can understand from an artistic perspective why you would have that because it makes sense to have a bounce light there, but it just doesn't quite read as fully motivated to me. Um, but overall, I think it's really nice. I think I really like how the sort of the lighting feels really consistent. I don't know if you got that through sort of having one same highlight color you were mixing everywhere, and that sort of universal highlight idea and universal shadows. But you've got I can see in sort of the shading on the red is a very similar sort of purple tone to the shading in the skin, and sort of some of the deep shades on your little on the sort of blue trim. It all looks basically it looks really really consistent in terms of the highlighting and shading. It looks almost as though it's sort of lit by like a full moon type bright, really bright, almost white moonlight. And I think that's a really hard thing to make look right. I was trying to paint something to look like moonlight the other day. I just sort of nope quit out of it because I couldn't make it look right. So I
It's
think
hard.
if that's the goal, then you've sort of hit it straight on. If it wasn't intentional, take it. But I think it's a really nice piece. Definitely something to be sort of really happy with.
Thanks.
Yeah, man, that hair looks absolutely stunning. Uh, really, really hard thing to paint. Grey. Was it grey you were going for or silver?
White, kind of classic anime bad boy look.
Yeah. No, I think you
Someone,
captured it.
po- someone pointed that out to me halfway through. It's like you just painted Sephiroth. I was like, oh yeah, I
Uh,
did do that actually.
totally did do that, yeah. And I like how, I presume it's deliberate, how you made his right camera left eye seemingly darker as like a consequence for that horrible wound running down his eye. So I thought that was a beautiful touch as well. Nice one, man. And I quite like that base thing actually. I think that looks kind of cool. You didn't paint it by the looks of
Yeah.
it, but I think it's quite cool. It adds a moody, cryptic, creepy type, imposing setting behind him, which is I think that complements his facial expression really nicely. So yeah, I'd carry on with that if I were you. I think it looks wicked.
Cheers.
Right, moving on.
Cool. Thomas Gallinari. It's a gift for his mom. Very good. Painting 20 years. And an opportunity to make something with all his love. Lovely. First 75 millimeter one ish. and trying to paint with less realistic colors and play with a few colors to get a more consistent look across the whole model. So looks lovely. I'd say you definitely succeeded. Like the whole thing, as you said, looks very consistent. And again, it's a nice color palette, that uh, kind of teal to magenta-y kind of thing going on with the gold. It's like Siege from Warhammer classically uses a lot of those colors, but you've got that nice desaturation to it as well to give her that ethereal feel with all of her flocks of birds. And I really love the way the base, it has all these interesting colors in it as well to tie it in and that tie it up with the model as well, rather than it being just like kind of plain grey stone. And the painting is in general like very, very neat and tidy. So like you're kind of showing it off to its best definition. Um, things that could be improved. I think for me, the birds don't look like they have a huge amount of definition to them, and I guess like they're meant to be kind of ghosty things. That's fine, but it might be nice to have a bit more stuff called out. Like I was thinking, maybe like they don't look like they have eyes, or their eyes are the same color, and she's blind, obviously, so she has the white eyes. So it might be kind of cool if the birds had black eyes to show that they're her eyes that she's seeing for her. And then as well, the color of them is very similar to her hair and parts of her robe and things. So I'd say in the hand it's probably grand, but like from the front view and in the photos, they kind of fade camouflage basically in with her in a couple of places. So a little bit more definition in them would solve that problem, but it might only exist in photos, like we said. Um, and then the hair, she's I'm not entirely sure above her crown which is these tufts coming out. And I'm not sure if those are meant to be her hair that looks like feathers or feathers from birds that are like on her sticking out of her crown. And because her hair and the birds are the same color, like it's not. Again, it's a little bit confusing. But again, that's to do with like I'm assuming it is her hair, but it could be either way because of the way you've chosen the palette. So if you had like some kind of black stripes or something in the bird's feathers or something to denote the difference between them and the hair, that would let us know one way or the other. I think the gold looks good on her bodice thing, and particularly on her left arm bracer. I think those are the two strongest elements of it. On the underneath of the sensor that she's carrying, and a couple other places, it looks a bit off on a kind of you have like quite a bright underside to these things. So like especially it's really obvious on the sensor because it's a kind of sphere and we have a highlight on the top and then basically a bright highlight on the bottom. Whereas you would think of it as like if the parts that are facing the sky, that's where the light's coming from. Any light that's hitting the bottom has been reflected off the ground and it's going to have lost some of its power. So you can have highlights in the bottom, but they should be weaker and maybe in a slightly different tone to reflect that it's hit off something. Because her bracer and her crown and everything are looking as metallic to me, but the sensor in her hand not quite as much. I think for like first trying this scale and trying out some new things in the model, you've done a really great job. It's a very cohesive look, and I'd say it looks really good. Like mounted on the shelf or wherever it is that your mother does be keeping it.
Yeah, what that guy said. Very good, very good feedback, dude. I just got one suggestion really. On top of that, you've got this very bright, saturated magenta line going right across the middle of the thing. So 1, 2, 3 points make a triangle to bring the attention back up to the head. So some of this magenta must be up here. Whether this is her hair or they are feathers, I don't think it really matters either way. What I think would be a super way to bring the attention back up here to this beautifully painted face is having this colour at the tips of the feathers and then transition that down into that hot ass pink just shy of the crown to give you that gradient. That's going to draw the eye straight back in there and you'll have this really, really strong triangle which would be absolutely pinnacle right on the face. So that's my only suggestion that Matt hasn't already covered. So yeah, great stuff, Thomas. This thing looks really, really nice. Love the colours. Great scheme. And those rocks, some of the best that I've seen in a very, very long time. Those are very, very nice rocks. Good job. Alrighty. Moving on. We've got Michael Smith for our consideration. First major bust which was completed. Wanted to do a realistic piece with a mix of airbrush and brush. Always good to mix them. Never just airbrush it because it looks airbrush. I feel like I can probably push this a bit further. If you think, then you're right. And I feel I managed to get some decent skin highlights. I'm not unhappy with the eye. So yeah, you have got some nice stuff going on with the skin. Very, very nice. But it could definitely go further. You're kind of finishing up on like 2 in most instances. So I think the contrast is better on this neck bit, like the smoothness of it. But this could definitely go higher to a 1. Same across the sort of the brow and the nose and the top of the lips and the chin. These wrinkles and folds, you could push highlights ever so slightly further with those for sure. The eye looks really, really good. How you've got like this red veining going through it. What I would say with the eye, it's kind of a bit of a, when it's this big, you could definitely exploit this opportunity you could use different shades of grey and save the bright white to give the eye some more life. So you could have a couple of reflections in here. It definitely needs a glint highlight across the pupil and the iris. Most definitely needs to have that. So add that in just with a dab of the pure white, and that'll instantly add so much more life to the eye. You'll be amazed. Just blonk, done. It'll look amazing. Like it's not bad in any way, but that's the light life. Sorry, the life light. Without it, there's no life in the eye. But going one step further with an eye this size, you could even push around some greys just to shade that eyeball itself. But yeah, really nicely done concentric circles, nice and tidy, and variation in the blue as well. So yeah, well done with the eye. Then with the thing coming out of his face, I think that would be wet. So I think you could add some more highlights to make that look glossy. It looks very dry and matte, and this thing is clearly just busted out of his face. So what's missing for me here in a big way is gore. It's inescapable. You don't have to cover the whole thing in blood for the blood god, but it would certainly appear more gory than it is. So I'd have like a little trickle of blood coming out the nose and going out to this crevice, and where they're busting out these pustules, that would be a lot more red and angry. And then some of these big ones, you'd have some blood resting on some of these upper folds, maybe dribbling down a little bit. Stuff like that, just to really make it as nasty as the sculptor intended. You got some bruising and stuff on the back of his head, which is really cool, like that. I just pushed that further, like around the front. It seems to be kind of missing. Let me get around to the front. So yeah, this is much better around here. But it just looked a little bit dry up here. So there's a little bit there, but just exaggerate that, take that a bit further, and yeah, get some blood in there, man. It's got to have some blood, I reckon. But yeah, fantastic, really great, great variation in the volumetrics of it. Just push the highlights a little bit further, and then the only other thing I had down for this was having a little bit more possibly color in his cheek. Just flipping around to that picture again. Yeah, so this cheek, just having a little bit more red in there. I think that would help it. Possibly the ear as well. We can never put too much red in an ear, apparently. So this, not the whole ear, this like the inner, I think it's called the conch, something like the inner bit there. That's usually a lot more transparent, thin. So you see the blood capillaries a lot easier through that little section, that membranous section there. And deeper bagging around the eyes, so blues, purples, stuff like that, just to exaggerate those bags. But yeah, nice piece, man. Anyone else?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me is just, I think you mentioned what you mentioned about sort of highlighting and popping it out a bit, but also like particularly that front on view. It looks almost as though it's meant to be like that, almost so it's meant to be sort of almost stylized, sort of in that almost comic style. So you can go either way. You can either pop the highlights up and bring it to that slightly more realistic style, or kind of lean into where it's already sort of taking itself and maybe do some quite sharp, quite dark sort of recess shades and things, and lean into that comic style that it almost feels like it's stepping into already. I quite like it. To me, it didn't necessarily look, when I first looked at it, I didn't think that it looked like it didn't have enough highlights, because I just thought that it looked like it was meant to be stylized. Easily see why you might want to take it either way. Really depends on what you're going for. And the other thing that I thought was quite nice, that a lot of people get wrong is the way you've done sort of the yellowing on the teeth. A lot of people are just
Mm.
pure white or pure ivory sort of on teeth, and it just looks really weird. So the sort of the nice color tone you've got there, just to me stands out as something that's a really nicely sort of attention to the detail there.
And I would take Jim's blood and add slime. Because
Slime.
yeah, because again, to get that kind of like, his skin tone's quite dry as well, and then you have this contrast with if the beast was very slimy. And for me, it looks more like it's not so much like exploding out and ripping the skin open, but it's like growing from inside and like pushing its way out through like all the orifices in his face. So if it was much shinier than he was, that would kind of sell
Mm.
that it's kind of, it's meant to be inside, but now it's out here. And then you can have it in a few places, like in his nose and things, where it's expanded too much and it's broken the skin. Then, and you have little drips of blood coming out from there as well. Because it's pretty horrific as it is, but it could always be more horrific.
Yes, suitably gross, Michael. We love it. We love gross stuff. All right, moving on up. Alex, got Jeffrey Phillips.
Yeah, just any feedback or advice in general. Trying to get better, but feel like we're at a standstill sometimes. Just agnostic of the model, just in general. If you're ever feeling like you're at a standstill, it means that any sort of the idea of plateauing comes from one or two things. Either um, your motor skill isn't sort of matching what you've got in your head, or knowledge isn't quite there yet. There's one of two disconnects. It's always down to either a falling behind in knowledge for what you're able to do. You need some new aha moment to make you go, "That's what's going to push me," or it's something where you really know what it is you want to do, um, but your brush just can't quite make it work, and that might come down to a technique or just needing more hours. At the end of the day, it for what can be very fun and what a lot of people will just sort of futz about with and just paint their models for gaming or whatever and not really care. When we're wanting to paint for sort of sake of painting, particularly with things like busts, if you're doing that, I assume that's part of your motivation is painting for painting's sake. It can be hard to improve. It's not some easy walk in the park. So plateauing is entirely normal. It's nothing to sort of beat yourself down about. What I would say is take a moment, before you paint your next model, and think on a little bit of self reflection of, is it that you're not quite being able to do what it is you can see in your mind's eye, in which case a little bit more refinement on sort of your execution, or is it that you feel like everything you're painting is just sort of coming out roughly the same, and you need to sort of pick something to focus in on and push yourself in terms of maybe doing some more learning a new technique, learning a new basically pick something new to expand your knowledge, because those are really the two reasons why people plateau and the two ways to get over that. But aside from that, looking at the actual model, it's very nice. I really like the sort of color scheme. The first thing that stands out to me is how nicely harmonized it is. I really like that sort of circle, sort of complete with the edge of the wings and then completed with the hair. You've got that sort of nice circle of that pink around the outside. It sort of frames the sort of figure really well and sort of brings it in and almost acts like a barrier to the outside world and what's around it, and really sort of hones your focus in on the model, um, which I really like. To me, the way you've sort of rendered some of the volumes and the muscles and sort of the skin tone doesn't always feel the most natural. I think just sort of something, maybe if it's a case of wanting to learn some new knowledge, maybe focusing on sort of how really really deep diving on sort of muscle volumes might be something to sort of look at as the next thing, if that's what you sort of choose to try and get past feeling a standstill. Just in terms of, you've got a lot of areas that feel like they go up to a highlight, don't quite make it. So I feel like the face could do with some more contrast. You're not quite bringing. It's not suffering from that muscle island syndrome, but you're not quite bringing all of the sort of highlights up to pushed against the top of the muscle. So it doesn't necessarily look unnatural, It just looks like you're stopping short of the finish line. And there might just be a little bit of bravery of going, you know what, that one extra highlight, that pushing it that little bit further. I'm sure we've all been there where we've done something and thought this needs a bit more, but it looks really nice as is, and you get the fear of doing that little bit extra. And it's never a big thing. One more highlight, every highlight's slightly smaller than the last, so an extra round of highlights it's never going to take too long. So that's always a nice thing. For me, the focus because of that doesn't fall on the face. It falls more around sort of the metal on a sort of breastplates. That's where if I sort of relax my eye, that's where it sort of falls. Just because that is so much brighter because it's got that natural reflection to it. Um, so as I say, I think just pushing up the highlights on the face a bit, pushing the sort of volumes a little bit sort of everywhere, but particularly in the face would help that really stand out. Um, but overall, I think the base I'm really unsold on. Don't dislike it. I also feel a bit weird about having tufts on a plinth for a bust. It makes sense for the setting, and I think that's mainly a personal taste thing. I don't think it's wrong in any sense. Just it confuses me a little bit. It's the easiest way to put it. Um, but yeah, no, overall, I think it's a really nice piece to sort of move in that direction. I can see that you've got nice blending on the wings and things. That sort of transition there is really smooth. So I think there's a lot of areas that really show that you know getting better is definitely within reach. But if you're feeling like you're at a standstill, just sort of, I don't think it's skill wise. It from what I can see, it looks like you've got the skills there to move to the next level. You just need to unlock that little bit of knowledge that'll make you go, that's how I apply it. That's how I do this next thing, and to sort of get that little push. But overall, I think it's a really a really nice piece.
Another good way if you're struggling with plateau is pick smaller models, man. Starting a bust will drive you crazy, man. Busts do just drive you insane. Any big things do. They are harder to paint and make look as good as they could possibly look. It is harder. So if you're plateauing next time, smaller mini, like go for something like 54 scale or something, or 75, that you can really push some new techniques around and learn stuff, but it's not going to bust your balls. Something like this will. I really like what you did with this. Those transitions in the wings are gorgeous. I think what would make it look a lot better very quickly would be to matte down the hair and then dry brush it a bit to give it some highlights. I think that would make a huge difference, and it'd be really, really quick and really, really easy to do. So yeah, I don't think you got that much further to push with this until it'd be in a really, really strong place. Just as Alex said, just extra highlights and doing what I said with the hair, and I think this will start to look much better very, very quickly. So cheers, Jeffrey. Matt, did you want to add?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Alex for his wise words from such a young man. But yeah, it looks like you've definitely got like plain tidiness. Like I'd imagine, Jeffrey, those like wings were a complete nightmare because you've got your lovely blend on it, and then you're like, okay, now I've got this tiny raised area to pick out with gold and not get it over anywhere else, and it just seems very like it could have been fiddly and annoying as well. A bust like this is, half a lady and a giant set of wings and a big thing of hair, whereas other busts are just it's a face and a neck. So it's understandable you keep getting frustrated, but I think don't let it get to you. It's always just a matter of thinking about what makes you enjoy painting and maybe picking something small to work on each time rather than thinking about the finish line way down the road. On the piece itself, I think the face could definitely, as people said, be a bit brighter. I understand why you did it like that because she's holding her head like this, so it makes sense that she'd have a shadow cast there. But you can cheat, you can give her like you can say she's just paler in the face, or she's wearing white makeup or paler makeup or something to draw more attention there. Like in the films, they'll even have a specific light, like or a reflector pointed at people's faces so that they can have it well lit, even though it should be in shadow for the scene. So don't be afraid to do things like that, especially on a bust. Like we can see plenty of examples of that, where from earlier ones where you have like an eye pulled out with a really bright highlight, even though it should really be in shadow because it looks good. Sometimes you're better off going. You want to do something realistic. Sometimes it's better. You want to do what looks good. Sometimes they're the same thing, but I'd say looking good is better, more important than looking super realistic, especially for our fantasy creature. So yeah, I hope you're feeling like more into the painting shortly, and I'd say uh, you know you've got plenty of skill to be building on here from the looks of this piece.
Cool. Good luck, Jeffrey. Hope to see more from you next month, man.
Cool.
All right, next up.
Okay, we have Abel Schlierich. Finish this one up for World Modeling Expo in Eindhoven next month. I don't know if that's near this month or whatever, but good luck in it anyway.
Today was the announcement of the awards for it, so it was this weekend just gone.
Ah, cool.
Okay. Well, I was gonna be really mean about this since it was for a competition, but given the competition is past, I'm not. So no point picking out things to critique. I think this is a really great looking bust, uh, especially the skin, which is obviously the main focus of it. You've done a really good job of having skin. Always the challenge is having good range of value to show your lights and shadows, and having a big range of hues to show the natural coloration of the skin, and then all the different layers that are on the surface and the different kinds of skin you get in different areas, and that's very hard to balance. I think you've done a really good job of it here. He's got a very interesting, like healthy looking skin tone, and you know we can tell that he's a pale complexion, but he's like out in the sun a lot, which is again a tricky balancing act to get. I really like how you've got the stubble in on the sides of his face, and then the red ear. Look at that red ear, looks really good. It's very natural looking. It really adds to the piece altogether. You've got a few little tiny. This little thing, we'll see it in a few busts. It happened with me a lot. There are little tiny balls of dry paint in a couple of places, like on his left bicep and down there, and that just happens when you're working the paint for a long time, and little bits of it can dry and they just collect there, and it happens especially when you're working with a complex skin tone like this. So, you know, you can pick them off and they'll disappear, and you don't really notice them that much unless you're looking at it under magnification anyway. Um, what else do I have in my notes? If you were adding something to the skin, which obviously, you know, it's a bit late for that now, but if you were, I'd say I wouldn't talk about lights or highlights or shadows or anything like that, but you could actually add more stuff. Like you could have dirt on him, or cuts, or blood, or tattoos, or war paint, or anything like that. And sometimes, you know, when you've put so much effort into the skin, you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be covering that up. But in general, it only adds more if you have the patience for it. And then on the gold, which was, I think, another main point. I think the sword handle looks very good. You get a nice run from light to dark, and it's looking quite metallic and in the right palette for gold. The necklace doesn't have it quite the same. It looks a bit more just kind of generally yellow. Um, uh, what's his name? Richard Gray put out a video recently where he paints Rogel Dorn all in non-metallic gold, and it's amazing. So I don't
It
know.
is.
I'd watch that. Uh, doesn't I feel like maybe you're better just having watched it, but yeah, I it's better advice than I could give you in an hour. And then on the hair, I think you could have a little bit more highlights around the crown of the hair, and you could also think about adding more color variety into the hair, because like very seldom people have this like flat, solid, sort of straw colored hair. You'd expect maybe he has kind of it goes to a darker brown in places where it's not getting as much sun, or having a very fair with like extremely white highlights. Um, and then just for general notes, if you're entering a competition in future, make sure you think very carefully about the model you pick. Like this is a good one that lets you show off a lot of things. But it's going to be more work because it's from the waist up. And there's certain things that are a bit iffy in terms of the sculpt, like his beard doesn't look like the way it's sculpted isn't very realistic. It looks almost like he has a fake beard that he's wearing on him. Like so to try and you can end up in a situation where you're trying to paint something in a realistic manner or in a pleasing manner when it's not sculpted in the best way to do that. Um, but I mean, it looks fine for what it is. Uh, but you know, if he didn't have that beard, you could optionally paint one on. But it being the way it is, you're kind of stuck with it. So that's just a kind of a thought in general when you're going into a contest. Um, think a lot about why you're picking this model, and you know how it suits your skill set, because at the end of the day, when you're in a contest, you're not necessarily trying to learn something new from it. You're just trying to execute to the best of your ability to impress the judges, or maybe you can just do it for fun.
Uh, wonderful work on the skin, I have to say. That's absolutely beautiful. And the hair. I think he's actually nailed the hair really, really nicely. I think there's enough tones in there, especially up and around the crown. I think that's really nicely picked out. But I agree with what you say about the beard. That is just an awkwardly sculpted beard, which most are, to be fair. What I'd say about the NMM is I think you're ready for the next stage of NMM. You've got the contrast there. You've got the reflections like responding how they should in the light setting. But I think the reason that the metals aren't selling particularly well on things like the armbands and these brooches or whatever they are, buckles on his belt, is they're lacking secondary reflections. So everything's just kind of one gradient from dark to light. And that works on things like blades in the simplest term, but I think you're capable of going a lot further than that. So where on this blade, sort of, you've got a light to dark on the top section, and then it's opposite on the bottom, and that sells. It's really, really good. But on the other elements, like I say, it's just not selling as metal because you need to have secondary reflections, bounces, interference colors, things like that, to integrate into it to really sell it as metal. So basically, it's a very, very tricky shape to do, but obviously those secondary reflections and color interactions happen differently depending on what shape you're doing. So next challenge for you, Abel, will be to kind of do some more research into that and start bringing those further elements into the NMM to really pick it off. Now you've mastered the kind of the first step of it, but you're ready to push it further, I think, now, most definitely. So take that on and your NMM will really start kicking, man. But otherwise, I hope you did well in the competition. It does look great, so well done. And hope to see more from you, man. Alex?
Just I think the skin is, it's really nicely sort of rendered. I think the volumes are taken quite well. I think it's really sort of smooth as well, which is always nice, always important unless you're doing it for stylistic reasons. Always important to have skin blended really smoothly, especially for competition, which is really nice. I think I definitely agree with what Matt was saying about it's a really open area, especially for competition. You unless it's like best skin that anyone's ever painted, you need something else going on there. Tattooing would be a really good one, particularly for this sort of subject matter. But even something as simple as a little bit of chest hair, free-handed on, would work quite well. I think that would do the job of filling that space a little bit more without it being anything too complicated. Like what Matt was saying, when you're doing a competition piece, you want to push yourself, but not so far out of your comfort zone if you've never done tattooing before, for example. So that would sort of bridge that gap. For the non-metallic, for me, I actually think the contrast could be a bit further, more in terms of the shadows. So particularly for me, the steel feels very, very blue, a little bit too blue for what I'd expect for this scale. I think when people have that very, very blue steel sort of look, it works at smaller scales. When you take it a bit higher, it doesn't quite sort of sell because at the smaller scales, it's that interpretation of reflection of the sky. At this scale, we need more than that. Like what Jim was saying there about we need more reflection, more sort of light bounce, more going on. Essentially, I think you could take the shadows a bit darker, and I think those sort of spot glint highlights of pure white every here and there in the corners and things could just pop it out a little bit more. But in general, I think it's a really nice piece, and I hope you've done well with it. At the very least, a competition is always a great time. I would kill for the opportunity to walk up to Roman Lapat or Mark Masklans and say, that model you judge, can I get some feedback on it? So at the very least, it's that opportunity. But hopefully you've taken something. So no, it's a really nice piece. So I would say good luck, but it's already happened. So yeah. I don't know what to say in that situation, but it's a lovely piece.
Great. Okay, well, we call it up there. What do you guys reckon? We do a few more?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's call it there for now. We're halfway, aren't we? So that's nice, convenient.
Yeah, and we probably want to take our time with these, given the scale of the one. So
Absolutely.
if you're gotten this far in the video, thanks a million for sticking with us. We'll get the rest of these lovely entries reviewed and back up in another video, hopefully not that far in the future.